the highest ideal that a person holds, consciously or unconsciously, that's their God. It functions in precisely that manner. And people might say, well, I don't believe in God. It's like, well, it depends on what you mean.
Right.
Like, and I'm not being foolish about that. It's like, we're very complicated creatures, and we're run by all sorts of very strange things down there in the unconscious, you know. And the Greeks thought we were the playthings of the gods because we serve lust, we serve thirst, we serve hunger, we serve rage, you know, and those things all transcend us. So that's why they were gods. You know, rage, that's the war god. Well, why is it a god? Well, it exists forever. It exists in all people. It takes them over and directs their behavior. It's a god. Well, you can quibble about the details. No, it's not a god. Okay, fine. It's a psychological force.
Right. Do people get too hung up on that one word?
Well, they don't really. We have to think about it functionally to some degree. We have to think about what that idea means. I mean, we've had that idea forever. It isn't just some superstition. Jesus, we've got to be more sophisticated than that, man.
Right.
You know, and that's partly, well, this is partly what I think is unfortunate about the new atheists, let's say, is they don't take the damn problem seriously. They think, well, Christianity, that's just a bunch of superstition. It's like, really? No, sorry, that's just not deep enough, man.
So what it really is the accounts of people trying to work out the issues of being a human.
Let me give you another example. This is so cool. This is so cool. It's Northrop Frye, who is a biblical scholar at the University of Toronto. This was one of his elucidations of the structure of the Bible. So the Bible's actually a story, which is weird because it's a whole bunch of different books written by a whole bunch of different people, edited kind of willy-nilly over thousands of years and then assembled, you know, by committee. It's a really strange book, but it has a narrative structure. So, and that sort of emerged as a collective decision across these thousands of years. So the Old Testament, here's the rough story in the Old Testament. Israel is sort of a middle power, and it rises to power, and domination. And then a prophet arises and says, look, you guys, you're all successful now. You're starting to get corrupt. You're not paying attention to the widows and children. You're not running your state according to the superordinate principle. You might say, well, the superordinate principle doesn't exist. It's like, okay, keep running it that way and see what the hell happens. That's what the prophet says, usually at the risk of his life. He says that to the king. It's like, fine, you don't believe in God, you don't believe in the superordinate principle, let's say that, the superordinate ethical principle, no problem. Keep doing what you're doing. Let's see what happens. Well, what happens is Israel gets wiped out, you know, and then for generations it's enslaved or its population is being destroyed, and then it sort of climbs back up to power, and then it gets powerful for a brief period of time and it gets corrupt, and a prophet comes up and says, remember that superordinate principle that you made a covenant with? You're not paying any attention to it anymore. You better look the hell out. And everyone ignores it, and bang. So it's order, corruption, chaos. Order, corruption, chaos. That happens 6 times now. So there's an idea behind it. The idea, because the state keeps rising, there's an idea that emerges out of that the aim is the perfect state. That's a utopian dream that arises out of that, let's call it, learned process over thousands of years. If we could only get the state perfect, if we could only get the state of perfect, well, let's say like the state of Israel or the Russian state, the communist state, if we could only bring utopia in at the political level, our problems would be solved. Well, then what happens is there's a transition in conceptualization, and that happens with the New Testament. And the New Testament conceptualization is, wait a minute, the state isn't salvation. The individual is salvation. Now you say, well, we're going to just throw that out, are we? That was a hell of a discovery, man. And then there's more to it. It's not only is the individual salvation, it's the truthful individual that's salvation. You think of how difficult a concept like that is to develop. If there's anything less self-evident than that. You know, because you think, well, who's going to run the dominance hierarchy? It's like the biggest bloody monster with a club. It's like, no, it turns out those are unstable. Those societies are unstable. They don't work. They collapse into chaos. They get corrupt. They lose sight of the superordinate principle, whatever that is. The stable solution is the individual that tells the truth. And it's taken us forever to figure that out. And that's partly what the postmodernists are after. That's their anti-phallogocentrism. That's why they skitter off and hide in their ideology. They're afraid to come out. They're afraid to be seen. They're afraid to speak because they have nothing to say. So we have to get sophisticated about this stuff, or we're going to throw it away without understanding it. It's unbelievable. Like, that story is, it's the story upon which Western civilization is founded. That's why Nietzsche said when God was dead that everything would collapse into chaos. He didn't say that triumphantly. He knew what was going to happen. So did Dostoevsky. That's why I admire those people so much. They knew what was coming. So what I've been trying to do, and I've been guided in large part by Jung, because he was the first. See, Jung took Nietzsche's problem seriously. Nietzsche said, look, we're losing our faith, we're losing our ability to relate to this superordinate ethical principle. And he actually blamed Christianity for killing itself with the sword of truth that it had produced. Said, so we're going to lose this, and it's big trouble, make no mistake about it, because our whole society is founded on those principles. We get rid of the animating spirit at the base of it, we're going to lose all of it. So, and Nietzsche thought, well, we're going to have to become superhuman to manage it. That's where his concept of the overman comes from, or the superman, which the Nazis sort of pulled off and parodied, I would say. Now Jung, you see, Jung was a student of Nietzsche's, not directly, but very much influenced by him. Jung thought that Nietzsche was wrong, that we couldn't create our own values. Because, look, it's so hard to create your own value. Like, let's say you're kind of an overweight guy and you decide to go to the gym for your New Year's resolution. It's like you don't. You go twice and then you stop, and it's because you can't create your own values, right? It's hard. You're not your own slave. You can't just tell yourself what to do. You have a nature. And so Jung's idea was, well, that we had to go back to the mythology. We had to go back to the stories. We had to go back into the underground, unconscious chaos and lift out what we had forgotten. And that's what he was trying to do with his psychology, and he's done it very effectively. Very, very effectively. He was a revolutionary thinker, but very difficult to understand. And so I've been working with Jung's ideas for a long time, trying to, I would say, make them more rational and articulate. Believe me, that's no critique, because every time I go back to Jung, which I do from time to time, thinking I've kind of mastered him, I learn a bunch of stuff that I didn't know. So what I've been trying to do is to resurrect, I'm trying to resurrect the dormant logos, I suppose, if you have to put it that way.
You say do nothing, that your life is meaningless if you're doing nothing. But what do you mean by doing nothing?
Well, by not accepting any responsibility, by not lifting a great load, by not acting out the archetype of the hero. That's what people are. That's what men are. If they're anything, they're mythological heroes, if they're anything.
Through some path, whatever it be.
There's lots of paths. I mean, so look, there's an old medieval idea. This is the idea of the imitation of Christ. This is something that Jung elaborates on a lot. He believed, this is one of the things that he said, was that the proper goal of a Christian, roughly speaking, is to enact the meta pattern of Christ's life in their own, to make it their own story. And so what did he mean by that? Well, part of it is, see, one of the things that characterizes the mythological figure of Christ, let's say, is that he takes on the burden of mortality voluntarily. He accepts it as a precondition of existence. And we have to do that because otherwise we get resentful. Like, life is hard, make no mistake about it. People's lives are tragic. You know, if you pick a random person off the street and you ask them about their life, man, usually there's things that have happened there. You know, they just beggar the imagination. It's no wonder people are angry and resentful and bitter. But the way out of that is to accept it, to accept your mortality, and that helps you transcend it. That's partly what the crucifix symbol means, because it was accepted voluntarily. You have to accept your death voluntarily. That's part of the path of the hero. It's a very difficult thing to do, obviously. What's your alternative?
Know when they're that.
Well, telling the truth is a good start, because then you don't fool yourself about who you are. You know, that's one of the things I tried to think through is why you should tell the truth. So it's not self-evident, man. A smart kid, the smarter the kid, the earlier they learn to lie. Lying is very powerful, because because you can manipulate the world with your language. And then you can get what you want lots of times, or escape from things that you don't want. So why not lie all the time? Well, I think the reason is, there's a bunch of reasons, but one of them is that you can't trust yourself if you lie. And there's going to be times in your life where you have no one to turn to except you. And so if you've stuffed yourself full of lies, then you're going to be in a crisis one day, and you're going to have to make a decision, and you're going to decide wrong.